claimed by the billionaire. The scandal she buried is the one he's paid to expose. Sarah Martinez gripped the steering wheel of her 10-year-old Honda Civic, knuckles white as she pulled into the pristine parking lot of Hartwell Industries' Chicago headquarters. The gleaming 40-story tower stretched impossibly high against the gray November sky, its glass facade reflecting her beat-up car like a cruel joke. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. Lip gloss applied, hair pulled back in what she hoped looked like a professional bun, rather than a desperate attempt to hide the fact that she couldn't afford a proper haircut. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, the same words she'd repeated every morning for the past 3 months while job hunting. The savings account was down to double digits, the rent was due in 5 days, and her 8-year-old daughter Emma needed new school shoes. This interview at Hartwell Industries, even if it was just for a junior administrative position, was her last shot before having to swallow her pride and move back in with her mother in suburban Aurora. The lobby overwhelmed her with its marble floors and abstract art that probably cost more than her annual salary at the nonprofit she'd been laid off from. Sarah approached the reception desk, where a woman who looked like she stepped out of a fashion magazine barely glanced up from her computer. "Sarah Martinez for the 10:30 interview," Sarah said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "37th floor, elevators to your right." The receptionist's tone suggested Sarah was already wasting her time. The elevator ride felt endless. Sarah had researched Hartwell Industries obsessively, a media conglomerate built by tech mogul Alexander Hartwell, who'd inherited his father's newspaper empire and transformed it into a digital powerhouse. At 35, he was worth an estimated $3 billion and had a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and intensely private, the kind of man who lived in a world so different from hers they might as well be on different planets. The 37th floor buzzed with activity. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan, and everywhere Sarah looked, people in expensive suits moved with the confident urgency that came from knowing their time was worth more per hour than most people made in a month. "Ms. Martinez?" A woman in her 50s approached with a warm smile that immediately put Sarah at ease. "I'm Janet Collins, head of HR. Thank you so much for coming in." The next hour flew by in a blur of questions about her experience managing communications for the children's literacy nonprofit, her familiarity with media relations, and her ability to handle confidential information. Janet seemed genuinely impressed with Sarah's portfolio of press releases and fundraising campaigns she'd coordinated on shoestring budgets. "Your creativity in maximizing limited resources is exactly what we need for this position," Janet said, making notes on Sarah's resume. "The role would involve supporting our executive team with various projects, often requiring discretion and adaptability. The salary range is $60,000 to $70,000, depending on experience, plus full benefits and performance bonuses." Sarah's heart hammered. $70,000 would change everything. Emma could stay in her current school, they could move to a better apartment, maybe even start a college fund. "I have to be honest with you, Sarah. This position reports directly to Mr. Hartwell, and he can be demanding. He works long hours and expects the same dedication from his staff. But he's also incredibly fair and values loyalty above all else. Would you be comfortable in that environment?" "Absolutely," Sarah replied without hesitation. She'd worked for difficult bosses before, and she wasn't afraid of hard work. Janet smiled. "I'd like to schedule you for a final interview with Mr. Hartwell himself. Are you available Thursday morning?" "Of course." Sarah hoped her enthusiasm didn't sound desperate. As she rode the elevator down, Sarah allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe her luck was finally changing. Maybe all those years of night classes to finish her communications degree while Emma slept, all the sacrifices and struggles were finally going to pay off. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the man entering the elevator on the 20th floor until he spoke. "Going down, I hope?" His voice was deep, amused. Sarah looked up and found herself staring into the most striking pair of gray eyes she'd ever seen. The man was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that was perfectly styled in that effortless way that actually required a lot of effort. His navy suit looked custom-tailored, and when he smiled she noticed a small scar above his left eyebrow that somehow made his classically handsome face more interesting rather than less. "Yes, going down," she managed, suddenly aware of how worn her blazer looked next to his immaculate appearance. "Good interview?" he asked, nodding toward the folder in her hands. "I hope so." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she'd never been able to break. "You work here?" "Something like that." His smile widened, and Sarah noticed he had laugh lines around his eyes. She'd expected someone who worked in a building like this to be more serious, more intimidating. "What position are you interviewing for?" "Executive Administrative Assistant. It sounds more glamorous than it probably is." "Trust me, the most important people in any organization are the ones who keep everything running behind the scenes. Anyone who underestimates an assistant is an idiot." The elevator dinged at the lobby level. As the doors opened, he gestured for her to exit first. "Good luck with the final interview," he said. "I have a feeling you'll do great." There was something in his tone that made her pause, but before she could ask what he meant, he was walking away, disappearing into the crowd of people in expensive suits. Sarah drove home to the small apartment she shared with Emma in Pilsen, a neighborhood that had been slowly gentrifying but still retained its Mexican-American character. The smell of her neighbor Mrs. Gutierrez's tamales filled the hallway, and she could hear Emma's laughter from behind their door. Her daughter was home from school, probably doing homework at the kitchen table that doubled as Sarah's desk. "Mama!" Emma launched herself into Sarah's arms the moment she walked in. At 8 years old, she was all knees and elbows, her dark hair in braids that were coming loose from a day of playground adventures. "How was school, mija?" "Good. Mrs. Peterson said my essay about family traditions was the best in class. I wrote about how we make tres leches cake for your birthday every year, even when money is tight." Sarah's chest tightened. Emma was too young to understand their financial struggles, but old enough to notice when Sarah stressed about bills or when they had to skip going out for pizza because it wasn't in the budget. "That's wonderful, baby. I'm so proud of you." She held Emma close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I have good news. Mama might get a really good job." "Does that mean we can get a puppy?" Sarah laughed despite herself. "Let's see about the job first." That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah researched everything she could find about Alexander Hartwell. The internet was full of business articles praising his innovative approach to digital media, his company's impressive growth, and his philanthropic efforts. Apparently, he'd donated over $100 million to education initiatives in the past 5 years. But there were surprisingly few personal details. No mention of a wife or girlfriend, no social media presence, no gossip column mentions of him at charity galas or society events. The photos showed a man who looked like he'd be equally comfortable in a boardroom or on the cover of GQ. In most pictures, he looked serious, focused, the kind of intensity that suggested he didn't have time for small talk or patience for incompetence. Sarah tried to imagine herself working for someone like that, anticipating his needs, managing his schedule, and hoped she wouldn't completely embarrass herself in the interview. Thursday morning arrived cold and gray, typical Chicago November weather that made Sarah grateful for the wool coat she'd bought at Goodwill the previous winter. She'd spent an hour getting ready, choosing her best blouse and the black slacks that made her legs look longer. Emma had helped her pick out earrings, declaring the small gold studs, "Very professional, Mama." Janet met her in the lobby again, this time leading her to a different bank of elevators that required a key card to access. "Mr. Hartwell's office is on the top floor," Janet explained as they rode up. "He likes to conduct important meetings up there. Says the view helps him think more clearly." The elevator opened directly into an executive suite that took Sarah's breath away. The entire north wall was glass, offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan that stretched to the horizon. The office was decorated in warm woods and rich leather. sophisticated but not ostentatious. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, filled with everything from business texts to what looked like classic literature and biographies. "Miss Martinez, thank you for coming in." The voice came from behind her, and Sarah turned around to find herself face to face with the man from the elevator. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Recognition dawned in his gray eyes, followed by something that might have been amusement. "We meet again," he said, extending his hand. "Alexander Hartwell." Sarah felt heat flood her cheeks as she shook his hand, remembering their casual conversation about her interview, how comfortable she'd felt talking to him. He'd known exactly who she was and what she was there for, and he'd let her ramble about the position she was interviewing for without saying a word. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." "Don't apologize. I enjoyed our conversation. It's rare that someone talks to me without knowing who I am first." He gestured to a seating area near the windows. "Please, have a seat. Can I get you coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great, thank you." Sarah settled into a leather chair that was probably worth more than her car, trying to regain her composure. Alexander poured coffee from an expensive-looking machine in the corner, and Sarah couldn't help noticing how he moved with easy confidence, like someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. When he handed her the mug, their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. "Janet tells me you have an impressive background in communications and fundraising," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "What made you want to leave the nonprofit world?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I loved the work, but unfortunately, funding cuts led to layoffs. I'm looking for a position where I can use my skills in a more stable environment." "And you think working for me would be stable?" There was a hint of humor in his voice. "I think working for a successful company with strong leadership is more stable than depending on grant funding and donations." "Fair enough. Tell me about a time when you had to manage a crisis." For the next hour, Alexander asked thoughtful questions that went beyond her resume. He wanted to know how she handled pressure, how she prioritized competing demands, how she maintained confidentiality in sensitive situations. Unlike many interviews where Sarah felt like she was performing, this felt like a genuine conversation between two professionals. "I have to ask," Alexander said, leaning back in his chair, "Janet mentioned that this position requires long hours and can be demanding. You have a daughter, correct? How would you manage the work-life balance?" Sarah had been dreading this question. Single mothers face this dilemma in every job interview. Be honest about their responsibilities and risk being seen as unreliable, or downplay their parenting duties and risk being caught in a lie later. "Yes, I have an 8-year-old daughter. She's my priority, but I'm also completely committed to doing excellent work. I have reliable childcare arrangements, and I'm used to managing multiple responsibilities efficiently. In my previous position, I often worked evenings and weekends when needed, and I never let it impact the quality of my work." Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "What does your daughter think about your job search?" The question surprised her. "She knows Mama is looking for a good job so we can have a better life. She's been incredibly patient and understanding through this whole process." "That says a lot about both of you." He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the lake. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. This position involves more than typical administrative work. I need someone I can trust completely, someone with excellent judgment and absolute discretion. The media world can be cutthroat, and there are always people looking for information they can use against me or this company. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility?" "Yes, I am." "The position is yours if you want it. $75,000 to start, full benefits, 4 weeks vacation, and performance bonuses based on company profits. When can you start?" Sarah blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, did you say 75,000? Is that not enough? I can go higher." "No, that's more than generous. I just wasn't expecting." She took a breath, trying to process what was happening. I'd love to accept the position. I can start Monday, if that works for you." Alexander smiled, and Sarah realized it was the first completely genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Monday it is. Janet will handle all the paperwork and get you set up with building access and equipment. Welcome to Hartwell Industries, Sarah." As they shook hands, Sarah felt like her life was finally turning around. For the first time in months, she could breathe easily, could imagine a future where she wasn't constantly worried about making ends meet. "One more thing," Alexander said as she prepared to leave. "I meant what I said in the elevator. The people who keep things running behind the scenes are the most important ones. I don't take that lightly, and I hope you won't either." Walking back to her car, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. She called Emma's school to let them know she'd be a few minutes late for pickup, then sat in the parking lot for a moment, just absorbing what had happened. Alexander Hartwell wasn't what she'd expected. Yes, he was intimidating in the way that powerful men often were, but he'd also been fair, thoughtful, and surprisingly easy to talk to. When he'd asked about Emma, she'd seen something in his expression that suggested he understood the challenges of balancing work and family responsibilities. But as she drove through Chicago traffic toward Emma's school, a small voice in the back of her mind wondered why he'd chosen her. Her qualifications were solid, but she was sure there had been other candidates with more experience, better connections, more impressive resumes. Why had Alexander Hartwell, a billionaire who could hire anyone he wanted, chosen a single mother from Pilsen with a 10-year-old Honda and student loan debt? She pushed the thought away. Maybe she was just lucky. Maybe he'd seen something in her that she didn't even know was there. Either way, she was determined to prove his faith in her was justified. Emma's excitement when Sarah told her about the job was infectious. They celebrated with pizza from their favorite place on 18th Street, and Emma insisted on making a congratulatory card with construction paper and glitter. "Now we can get that puppy, right, Mama?" Sarah laughed, pulling her daughter close. "Maybe not right away, but let's see what happens." That weekend, Sarah bought new work clothes and spent Sunday preparing for her first day. She studied the company's organizational chart, researched recent news coverage of Hartwell Industries, and even read some of Alexander's interviews in business magazines. The picture that emerged was of a man who was brilliant but demanding, someone who expected excellence from himself and everyone around him. Monday morning, Sarah arrived at the office 15 minutes early, dressed in a new navy suit that made her feel professional and confident. Janet met her at the elevators and spent the morning getting her settled in: computer setup, building orientation, introduction to key staff members. Sarah's desk was on the 39th floor, just outside Alexander's office suite. The space was elegant but functional, with everything she could need: high-end computer equipment, multiple phone lines, and a view of the city that still took her breath away. "Mr. Hartwell typically arrives around 7:30, Janet explained. "He likes to have his schedule reviewed first thing, along with any urgent messages from the weekend. Coffee, black, no sugar, the Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, and a summary of overnight news related to the company or its competitors." By the time Alexander arrived, Sarah had everything prepared. She knocked on his office door at exactly 7:30. "Come in." He looked up from his phone, and Sarah noticed he was already dressed in what looked like another perfectly tailored suit. "Good morning, Sarah. How was your first morning?" "Very good, thank you. I have your schedule and messages, and I've prepared the news summary you requested." "Efficient. I like that." He accepted the folder she handed him, their fingers brushing again. "Any fires that need immediate attention?" "Nothing urgent. You have the board meeting at 10, lunch with the Tribune editorial staff at noon, and a conference call with the London office at 4. I've confirmed all appointments and prepared the materials you'll need." Alexander nodded, scanning the schedule. "What about the Peterson investigation?" Sarah consulted her notes, confused. "I don't see anything about a Peterson investigation on your calendar." Something shifted in Alexander's expression, so subtle she almost missed it. "Right, of course. That's a separate matter. Thank you, Sarah. Close the door on your way out, please. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah settled into her new role with growing confidence. Alexander was demanding, as advertised, but he was also fair and surprisingly considerate. When she mentioned that Emma had a school play, he made sure to keep that evening clear of meetings. When she worked late to help prepare for a major presentation, he ordered dinner for both of them and asked about her daughter's interests with genuine curiosity. She wants to be a veterinarian, Sarah said one evening as they worked through contract revisions. She's been obsessed with animals since she could walk. We have a goldfish named Dr. Whiskers because she insists on practicing medicine on him. Alexander smiled. Smart kid. The world needs more women in science and medicine. I just want her to know she can be anything she wants to be. Sarah looked up from her computer. Growing up where I did, not everyone gets that message. Where did you grow up? Little village, initially. My parents immigrated from Guadalajara when I was 3. My dad worked construction. My mom cleaned houses. They sacrificed everything so I could go to college. Alexander was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. That must have been difficult, balancing their expectations with your own dreams. Sometimes they wanted security for me, a stable job, marriage, grandchildren. The divorce was hard for them to understand. You were married before? Sarah nodded, not sure why she was sharing so much personal information. Maybe it was the late hour or the way Alexander listened with complete attention, making her feel like her words mattered. Emma's father. We married young, divorced when she was 4. He wasn't ready for the responsibilities of being a husband and father. His loss, Alexander said quietly. Emma sounds like an amazing kid. She is. She's the best thing I've ever done. The conversation stayed with Sarah long after she went home that night. There was something about Alexander that made her want to open up, to share parts of herself she usually kept private. It was dangerous territory for an employee, she knew, but she couldn't seem to help herself. Their working relationship grew easier over the following weeks. Alexander began trusting her with increasingly sensitive projects, and Sarah prided herself on anticipating his needs before he had to ask. She learned that he took his coffee a specific way, preferred morning meetings to afternoon ones, and had a habit of pacing when he was thinking through complex problems. What surprised her was how much she enjoyed the intellectual challenge of the work. Alexander often asked for her input on communication strategies, valued her perspective on how different messages might be received by various audiences. He treated her like a trusted advisor rather than just an assistant, and Sarah found herself looking forward to their daily planning meetings. But as comfortable as she'd become in her new role, she couldn't shake the feeling that there were layers to Alexander Hartwell she hadn't uncovered yet. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't read, or he'd make cryptic references to projects that weren't on his official schedule. The first real crack in her growing trust came on a Friday afternoon in late December. Sarah was organizing files when she came across a folder marked Background Investigations, Confidential. She almost put it aside without looking, but her own name printed on the tab made her pause. Inside were documents that made her blood run cold. A comprehensive background check that included not just her employment history and credit report, but details about her childhood, her divorce, even Emma's school records. There were surveillance photos of her apartment building, her car, places she shopped, photos of Emma at school, at the park, completely unaware she was being watched. At the bottom of the file was a report from a private investigator, dated 2 weeks before her first interview. The last page contained a recommendation. Subject appears to be vulnerable to financial pressure and desperate for stable employment. High likelihood of compliance and discretion. Recommend proceeding with recruitment. Sarah felt sick. Her hands shook as she read the clinical assessment of her life, the cold calculation behind her hiring. She'd thought Alexander had seen something special in her, had valued her skills and judgment. Instead, he'd chosen her because he thought she was desperate enough to be manipulated. Sarah? Alexander's voice from his office made her jump. "Can you come in here for a moment?" She quickly closed the folder and tried to compose herself, but her heart was hammering as she entered his office. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." "I'm fine." She couldn't meet his eyes, afraid he'd see the betrayal and hurt she was trying to hide. "I wanted to discuss holiday schedules. I know Christmas is important to you and Emma. Why don't you take the entire week off?" "Paid? Of course." His kindness felt like salt in the wound. "That's very generous, thank you." "Sarah." His voice was gentle, concerned. "What's wrong?" She looked up at him then, this man she'd been growing to trust, to care about more than she should. His gray eyes seemed genuinely worried, but how could she trust her own judgment now? How could she trust anything about him? "Nothing's wrong. Is there anything else you need before I leave today?" Alexander studied her face for a long moment, and Sarah had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her attempted composure. "No, that's all. Have a good weekend." Sarah made it through the rest of the afternoon on autopilot, her mind reeling with questions and hurt. When 5 o'clock came, she couldn't get out of the building fast enough. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a glass of wine and tried to make sense of what she'd discovered. Part of her wanted to march into Alexander's office on Monday and confront him, demand to know why he'd had her investigated like a criminal. But the practical part of her, the part that thought about Emma's needs and their rent and the health insurance she couldn't afford to lose, urged caution. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe background checks were standard procedure for positions that involved access to confidential information. Maybe the surveillance was just due diligence, not something sinister. But even as she tried to rationalize what she'd found, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her hiring than Alexander had told her. The question was, what did he really want from her, and what would happen when he got it? The weekend passed slowly. Sarah found herself analyzing every interaction she'd had with Alexander, looking for signs she'd missed, clues about his true intentions. By Monday morning, she'd decided to act as if nothing had happened while she tried to figure out what was really going on. Alexander seemed to sense her changed mood immediately. "Are you sure you're feeling all right?" he asked during their morning briefing. "You've seemed off since Friday." "Just tired. Emma had a stomach bug over the weekend." It was a lie, but it seemed to satisfy him. Still, Sarah noticed he watched her more carefully over the next few days, as if he was trying to read her thoughts. The tension between them grew over the following week. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, but she found herself analyzing everything Alexander said and did, looking for hidden meanings and ulterior motives. When he asked her to research media coverage of a competing company, she wondered if he was planning some kind of attack. When he requested a list of contacts at local newspapers, she worried about what story he might be trying to plant. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in January. Sarah was preparing to leave when Alexander emerged from his office looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "I need to ask you to stay late tonight," he said. "Something urgent has come up." "Of course. What do you need?" "There's going to be a story in tomorrow's Tribune that could be damaging to the company. I need you to help me craft a response." Sarah followed him into his office where he had newspaper layouts spread across his desk. Her blood turned to ice when she saw the headline, "Hartwell Industries Investigative Unit Exposed. Media Giant's Secret Surveillance Operation Targets Employees and Competitors." "Alexander." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What is this?" He ran his hands through his hair, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely rattled. "It's complicated, Sarah. There are things about this company, about my business, that I haven't told you." "What kind of things?" But even as she asked, pieces were starting to fall into place. The mysterious projects, the cryptic references, the background investigation. "Hartwell Industries doesn't just run media companies," Alexander said quietly. "We also provide investigative services, corporate intelligence, background research, sometimes surveillance. Sarah felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "You're telling me you run a spy operation?" "It's not that dramatic. We help companies conduct due diligence, investigate potential partners, verify information. It's all legal." "And me?" Sarah's voice was getting stronger, anger beginning to override shock. "Where do I fit into your investigative services? What exactly did you hire me to spy on?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, Sarah felt the last of her trust in him crumble. "There's a story," he said finally, "about something that happened 5 years ago. A scandal involving a city alderman taking bribes from developers. The reporter who broke the story was killed in what looked like a car accident, but there were questions about whether it was really accidental." Sarah's heart stopped. She knew exactly what story he was talking about. "The reporter's name was Miguel Santos," Alexander continued. "He'd been investigating connections between Alderman Rodriguez and several construction companies. The story implicated some very powerful people." "I know who Miguel Santos was." Sarah's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. Alexander looked up sharply. "You know the case?" "Miguel Santos was Emma's father." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Alexander's face went white, and Sarah saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "Sarah, you hired me to get information about Miguel's investigation." It wasn't a question. The pieces were all falling into place now, a picture so ugly she could hardly bear to look at it. "You thought I might have his notes, his sources, something that could help you either bury the story or sell it to the highest bidder." "It's not like that." "Isn't it?" Sarah was standing now, her hands clenched into fists. "You had me investigated. You had my daughter photographed. You invaded our privacy and manipulated me into trusting you, all so you could get your hands on information about the man who died because he was trying to expose corruption." "Sarah, please let me explain." "Explain what? That you're exactly the kind of person Miguel died trying to expose? That you've been using me this whole time?" Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice was steady. "I trusted you. I let Emma get attached to the idea of stability, of a better life. I let myself believe you actually cared about us. I do care about you, both of you. You care about what I might know. That's not the same thing." Alexander stood up, moving around his desk toward her, but Sarah backed away. "Don't. Just don't." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I should have known it was too good to be true. Men like you don't hire women like me unless you want something." "That's not." "I quit." The words came out stronger than she felt. "I'll pack up my desk and be gone by tomorrow morning. Don't bother with severance pay or references. I never want to see you again." Sarah turned toward the door, but Alexander's voice stopped her. "What if I told you that the people who killed Miguel are still out there? What if I told you that I've been trying to finish what he started?" She turned back slowly, hating herself for the flicker of hope in her chest. "What are you talking about?" "Sit down. Please, let me tell you the whole truth." Against her better judgment, Sarah sat down. Alexander returned to his chair, but instead of the confident executive she'd come to know, he looked exhausted, older than his 35 years. "5 years ago, Miguel Santos contacted me," he began. "He'd uncovered a network of corruption that went deeper than just one alderman taking bribes. There were connections to organized crime, to federal contracts, to projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But he needed help verifying some of the financial information he'd uncovered." Sarah frowned. "Miguel never mentioned knowing you." "He didn't know who I was. He reached out to Hartwell Industries' investigative division, thinking we were just another corporate intelligence firm. He had no idea he was talking to me personally." "So, you helped him?" "I tried to, but before I could provide the information he needed, he was killed. The car accident happened the day before he was supposed to meet with federal investigators." Alexander opened a file drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been investigating his death ever since. The people who killed him think they're safe because the story died with him. But Miguel was smart. He left breadcrumbs, hints about where to find the evidence he'd gathered." "What kind of breadcrumbs?" "That's what I was hoping you might know. In our phone conversations, Miguel mentioned that he'd hidden copies of his research somewhere safe, somewhere the people he was investigating would never think to look. He said he'd made sure his family would be taken care of, that his daughter would never want for anything." Sarah's breath caught. "Emma. I think Miguel left something for her, something that could finish what he started and bring his killers to justice, but I needed to get close to you to find out what." The room was quiet except for the hum of the heating system. Sarah stared at Alexander, trying to process what he'd told her. "So you manipulated me, lied to me, invaded my privacy, all to get information that might not even exist?" "I know how it sounds. But Sarah, these people killed the father of your child. Don't you want justice for him? Don't you want Emma to know that her father died for something important? I want my daughter to be safe. I want her to grow up without having to look over her shoulder, wondering if the people who killed her father might come after her too." "They won't come after her as long as they think the threat died with Miguel. But if they ever suspect that he left evidence behind—" Alexander let the implication hang in the air. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "You're saying Emma could be in danger? I'm saying she's safer if we find whatever Miguel left and use it to expose the people responsible. Once the truth comes out, once they're arrested, Emma will never have to worry about them again." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering Miguel in the weeks before his death. He'd been anxious, constantly checking over his shoulder, working late into the night on stories that he couldn't or wouldn't discuss with her. She'd thought he was just stressed about work, but now she wondered if he'd known how much danger he was in. "What makes you think Miguel left something specifically for Emma?" "Because he loved her more than anything in the world, and because he was too good a reporter to put all his eggs in one basket. He would have made sure his work could survive, even if he didn't." Alexander opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed Miguel at his computer, but what caught Sarah's attention was what was visible on his desk: Emma's artwork, pictures she'd drawn for him, a small stuffed elephant she'd given him for Father's Day. "This was taken by surveillance the week before he died," Alexander said quietly. "Look at what's on his bulletin board." Sarah leaned closer and saw dozens of Emma's drawings pinned up around Miguel's workspace. But there was something else, a pattern she hadn't noticed before. In several of the drawings, Emma had included numbers and letters that looked random, like a child's attempt at writing. "Miguel was teaching her to read and write," Sarah said slowly. "She was only 3, but he said she was so smart, she could learn early if someone took the time to work with her." What if it wasn't random scribbling? What if Miguel was teaching her something specific? Sarah's heart started to race. "You think he embedded codes or clues in her drawings?" "I think Miguel Santos was brilliant, and he knew that the safest place to hide something important was somewhere no one would think to look. What could be more innocent than a 3-year-old's artwork?" "I still have them." The words came out as a whisper. "I kept all of Emma's drawings from when she was little. They're in a box in her closet." Alexander leaned forward. "Sarah, I know I've given you every reason not to trust me. I know I handled this badly, that I should have been honest with you from the beginning. But I'm asking you to help me finish what Miguel started. Not for me, but for him, for Emma, for all the people who suffer when corruption goes unpunished." Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Everything logical told her to walk away, to take Emma and disappear before they got any deeper into something dangerous. But the part of her that had loved Miguel, that still grieved for the brilliant, passionate man who'd been taken from them too soon, wanted justice. "If I help you," she said slowly, "I need your word that Emma's safety comes first. The moment I think she's in danger, we stop." "You have my word." And I want the truth. All of it. No more lies, no more manipulation. I promise. Sarah took a deep breath. Then let's go get those drawings. The drive to Sarah's apartment was tense and quiet. Alexander followed her in his own car, a black BMW that looked as expensive as she'd expected. As they climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, Sarah found herself seeing her home through his eyes. The worn carpet, the peeling paint, the sound of her neighbor's television through thin walls. Emma was at her friend Maria's house for a sleepover, which Sarah was grateful for. Whatever they were about to discover, she didn't want her daughter to be involved more than she already was. The box of artwork was exactly where she'd left it, tucked away in Emma's closet behind winter clothes that were almost too small. Sarah pulled it out and carried it to the kitchen table, her hands shaking slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of pieces of paper covered in a small child's attempts at drawing. Stick figures, houses with windows and doors out of proportion, animals that looked more like abstract art than recognizable creatures, and scattered throughout all of them, letters and numbers that had seemed like random attempts at writing. Alexander spread the drawings across the table, studying each one carefully. Do you remember Miguel working with her on any of these specifically? Sarah picked up a drawing of what looked like their old apartment building, with figures that she assumed were meant to be her, Miguel, and Emma. In the corner, Emma had written what looked like B47, G23, R16. This one, she said. I remember Miguel spending a lot of time with her on this one. He kept saying she was so smart that she had such a good memory for details. Alexander examined the drawing more closely. B47, G23, R16. Could be coordinates or file numbers or safe deposit box numbers? They looked at each other, the possibility hanging between them. Miguel had a safe deposit box? Alexander asked. I think so. He was always very careful about important documents. Said you never knew when you might need to prove something. But I don't know where, or if Emma and I would have access. Alexander pulled out his phone and made a call. Marcus, it's Alex. I need you to run a search on safe deposit boxes registered to Miguel Santos in the Chicago area. Yes, I know it's late. This is important. While they waited for the callback, Sarah continued going through Emma's drawings. In another picture, she found first BKCH, written in Emma's careful 3-year-old handwriting. First Bank of Chicago, she said, showing Alexander. That has to be it. When Alexander's phone rang 10 minutes later, he put it on speaker. Boss, I found 3 safe deposit boxes registered to Miguel Santos. One at First Bank of Chicago, box number 473. One at Chase, box 982. And one at a smaller bank called Community Trust, box 156. Sarah and Alexander looked at the drawing again. B47, G23, R16. Box 473, maybe? Maybe, but what are G23 and R16? They spent the next 2 hours going through every drawing in the box, finding similar codes in a dozen different pictures. By the time they finished, they had a list of what appeared to be safe deposit box numbers, bank codes, and possibly account numbers. Miguel was systematic about everything, Sarah said, sitting back in her chair. He wouldn't have just hidden evidence randomly. There has to be a pattern, a logical way to piece this together. Alexander nodded, studying their notes. The question is, how do we access the boxes? Even if Emma is listed as a beneficiary, she's a minor. You'd need documentation, probably court orders. Actually, Sarah said slowly, Miguel might have thought of that too. When Emma was born, he insisted on setting up a trust for her education fund. He said he wanted to make sure she'd be able to go to college no matter what happened to him. I never thought much about it at the time, but what if the trust gives me access to more than just college money? Do you have the trust documents? Sarah retrieved the folder of important papers she kept in her bedroom. Among the birth certificates and insurance policies was a thick legal document establishing the Emma Santos Educational Trust. As Alexander read through it, his expression changed. "Sarah, this isn't just an educational trust. Look at Section 12. Sarah read the indicated passage, her eyes widening. The trust gave her, as Emma's guardian, access to any and all financial accounts and safe deposit boxes established for Emma's benefit, with the authority to act on her behalf until she reached the age of 25. Miguel made sure I could get to whatever he left," she whispered, "even if something happened to him." They both fell quiet, the weight of Miguel's foresight and sacrifice settling between them. He'd known how dangerous his investigation was, had known there was a real possibility he wouldn't survive to see his daughter grow up, but he'd made sure she'd be protected, and that the truth would eventually come out. "We can go to the banks tomorrow," Alexander said gently. "But Sarah, once we open those boxes, there's no going back. If Miguel's evidence is as damaging as I think it is, we'll be putting ourselves in danger." Sarah thought about Emma, asleep at her friend's house, innocent and safe for now. Then she thought about Miguel, brilliant and passionate and dead at 32 because he'd tried to do the right thing. "Miguel died because he believed the truth mattered more than his own safety," she said. "I owe it to him, and to Emma, to finish what he started." Alexander reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "We'll finish it together." For the first time since discovering the background investigation file, Sarah allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been completely wrong about Alexander Hartwell. The next morning, they started with First Bank of Chicago. Sarah's hands shook as she signed the access forms, but the trust documents were ironclad. Within 20 minutes, they were seated in a private room with safe deposit box 473 open in front of them. Inside were thumb drives, photographs, financial documents, and a letter addressed to Emma in Miguel's handwriting. "My dearest Emma," Sarah read aloud, tears streaming down her face. "If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. But it also means you're old enough to understand why I had to take the risks I took. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, and everything I did was to make the world a little better for you and kids like you." The letter went on to explain that Miguel had uncovered evidence of a corruption network that reached from Chicago city government to federal contracts, involving millions of dollars in fraudulent deals and several suspicious deaths of people who'd gotten too close to the truth. "He names names," Alexander said, reviewing the documents. "Alderman Rodriguez was just the tip of the iceberg. This goes all the way up to the mayor's office, the governor's mansion, even some federal officials." The thumb drives contained recordings of conversations, copies of bank records, and detailed timelines showing how the corruption network operated. It was everything they needed to bring down some of the most powerful people in Illinois. "This is enough to put them away for life," Sarah said, "but it's also enough to get us killed." Alexander was quiet for a moment, studying the documents. "Not if we do this right. Miguel's mistake was trying to go it alone. Trying to be a traditional journalist, publishing a story that could be suppressed or discredited. We need to be smarter." "What are you suggesting?" "We turn this over to federal authorities, but we also make sure copies get to every major news outlet simultaneously. Make it impossible to bury or suppress. Create so much attention that it would be more dangerous for them to come after us than to let us live." Over the next 3 days, Alexander coordinated the most complex media strategy of his career. Using his connections and resources, he arranged for simultaneous releases of Miguel's evidence to the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Tribune, the Sun-Times, and 3 national newspapers. Sarah worked alongside him, helping to organize the material and craft the narrative that would make the biggest impact. For the first time since Miguel's death, she felt like she was honoring his memory in a meaningful way. The story broke on a Tuesday morning with headlines that dominated news coverage across the country. "Massive Corruption Network Exposed. FBI Arrests 15 Officials in Chicago Scandal" ran across the front page of every major newspaper. By noon, Alderman Rodriguez was in handcuffs. By evening, the mayor had resigned and the governor was calling for a special prosecutor. The evidence Miguel had died protecting was finally seeing the light of day. Sarah watched the news coverage from Alexander's office, still hardly believing it was real. "Miguel would be so proud," Alexander said quietly, sitting down beside her. "I hope so. I hope Emma will be proud too, when she's old enough to understand." "She will be. Her father was a hero." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the story continued to unfold on the news. Finally, Sarah turned to face Alexander. "I need to know something," she said. "When this is all over, when the trials are finished and the story fades from the headlines, what happens to us? To me and Emma?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to happen?" "I want the truth, about why you really hired me, about what this job actually is, about whether anything between us has been real. The truth is that I hired you because I needed information that I thought you might have. The truth is that I manipulated the situation to get close to you, and I'm not proud of that." He paused, running his hands through his hair. "But the truth is also that somewhere along the way, it stopped being about the investigation. Somewhere along the way, I started caring about you and Emma more than I cared about the story." Sarah searched his face, looking for any sign of deception. "How am I supposed to trust you? How am I supposed to know what's real and what's just part of your plan?" "You probably shouldn't trust me," Alexander said honestly. "I've given you every reason not to. But Sarah, I'm asking you to give me a chance to earn that trust back. Let me prove that what I feel for you and Emma is real." "And what exactly do you feel?" Alexander stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city spread below them. "I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for someone like you, someone who challenges me, who makes me want to be better than I am. I feel like Emma is the daughter I never knew I wanted, and I can't imagine my life without both of you in it." He turned back to face her. "I feel like I'm in love with you, Sarah Martinez, and I don't deserve you, but I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to try to deserve you." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this, Alexander. I don't know if I can handle caring about someone who lives in a world so different from mine, someone who makes decisions that affect people's lives without them even knowing it." "Then let me come into your world. Let me learn what it's like to live without manipulating people, without always having an ulterior motive. Let me learn how to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you." Over the following weeks, as the corruption scandal continued to unfold and more arrests were made, Sarah found herself watching Alexander carefully. She saw him struggle with the urge to control situations, to manipulate outcomes to his advantage. But she also saw him catch himself, saw him choose transparency over manipulation, honesty over strategy. When Emma finally met him officially, not as her mother's boss but as someone who cared about both of them, Sarah held her breath. But Emma, with the intuitive wisdom of children, seemed to understand that Alexander was someone who could be trusted. "He has sad eyes," she told Sarah one evening after Alexander had taken them to dinner. "But they're not sad when he looks at us. It was Emma who suggested that maybe Dr. Whiskers would like a friend, and maybe they could get a puppy after all. It was Emma who invited Alexander to her school's science fair, where he spent 2 hours genuinely fascinated by her project on how fish breathe underwater. And it was Emma who, 3 months later, asked Sarah if Alexander was going to be her new daddy. "Would you like that?" Sarah asked, sitting on her daughter's bed during their nightly chat. "I think Daddy Miguel would like him," Emma said seriously. "I think he'd be happy that someone loves us and wants to take care of us." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "What makes you think Alexander wants to take care of us?" "Because he fixed the wobbly leg on the kitchen table without us asking. Because he bought me the book about veterinarians even though it wasn't my birthday. Because he looks at you the way Prince Eric looks at Ariel in the movie." Out of the mouths of babes. That weekend, Alexander took them to Navy Pier. As they walked along the water, Emma running ahead to look at the boats, he took Sarah's hand. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her. "About not knowing if you can handle caring about someone from my world. And I don't want you to handle my world. I want to build a new world, one that's ours, yours and mine and Emma's." Sarah looked at him, this complicated, powerful man who'd turned her life upside down and somehow made it better than she'd ever imagined it could be. What would that look like? It would look like a man who learns to put family before business, who values trust more than control. It would look like a woman who challenges him to be better, who reminds him what really matters. And it would look like a little girl who teaches them both that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Emma came running back to them, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mama! Alexander! Look what I found." She held out a smooth piece of beach glass, worn soft by the waves of Lake Michigan. It was the color of sea foam, beautiful in its imperfection. "It's treasure," she announced solemnly. Sarah took the piece of glass, turning it over in her palm. Like their relationship, it had been shaped by forces beyond their control, made beautiful by the very things that could have destroyed it. "Yes," she said, looking up at Alexander and seeing her future reflected in his gray eyes. "It's treasure." 6 months later, Alexander proposed to Sarah in the same conference room where she'd first interviewed for the job. He'd filled it with Emma's artwork, not the coded drawings that had helped bring down a corruption network, but new ones, full of rainbows and puppies and stick figures of a family of 3. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your strength, your integrity, your fierce devotion to Emma. I love the way you challenge me to be better than I thought I could be, and I love the way you've taught me that the most important investigations are the ones we do into our own hearts." Sarah said yes, not because her life had become a fairy tale, but because she'd learned that real love wasn't about perfect people finding each other. It was about flawed people choosing to grow together, to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their past. Emma was their maid of honor, and in her wedding speech she announced that she'd decided to be a detective when she grew up, just like her daddy Miguel and her new daddy Alexander. "Because sometimes," she said, "the most important thing you can do is help people find the truth." Later, when the celebration was over and Emma was asleep, Sarah and Alexander sat on the balcony of their new apartment, looking out over the city lights of Chicago. "No regrets?" Alexander asked, his arm around her shoulders. Sarah thought about Miguel, who'd died pursuing truth and justice. She thought about the scared, desperate woman she'd been just over a year ago. She thought about Emma, asleep in her room with Dr. Whiskers and their new puppy, Princess Leia, curled up on her bed. "No regrets," she said, "just gratitude." And in the distance, the lights of the city twinkled like stars, illuminating all the stories yet to be told, all the truths yet to be uncovered, all the love yet to be discovered by those brave enough to look for it.